Elena was just taking off her gloves when the world exploded. There was no knock, no warning. The front wall of the clinic disintegrated as a black armored SUV tore through brick and glass like paper. Before Elena could scream, 4 men in tactical gear swarmed through the wreckage. They didn't want the cash register. They didn't want drugs. They wanted her. She fought, grabbed a scalpel, slashed wild, but a heavy hand clamped over her mouth. A black bag swallowed her vision. The last thing she heard was the whimpering of the dog she just saved before a needle bit her neck and dragged her under. When Elena woke, the sharp tang of bleach was gone. In its place, expensive leather, old mahogany, and something else beneath it all, something sharp and metallic, the smell of infection. She scrambled backward and slammed into a door. Locked, reinforced steel. She was trapped in a gilded cage. "Don't bother," a voice rasped from the shadows. "That door only opens from the outside." Elena whipped around. A figure sat in a wingback chair in the corner, half swallowed by darkness. "Who are you?" Her voice shook, but she held her ground. "What do you want?" The figure leaned forward. "Last week, a street dog came into your clinic with a bullet wound near the femoral artery. 3 vets called it fatal. You fixed it in 20 minutes with fishing line and a bottle of vodka." Elena's blood went cold. "You've been watching me." "I've been hunting for you." The man stood, stepping into the pale glow of the chandelier. Tall, dangerously handsome, but pale, deathly pale. Sweat beaded his forehead, his jaw clenched tight against pain. "You have until sunrise to do the same for me. If I die, my men outside have orders to kill you. If you fail—" His eyes locked onto hers, black and merciless. "I'll do it myself." "I'm not a doctor," Elena stammered, retreating. "Not anymore, I lost my license." "Tonight," he growled, "you're my only option." Lorenzo Valenti reached up and tore his black dress shirt open. Buttons scattered across the marble floor like bones. Elena gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. What she saw wasn't just a wound. It was a massacre. The skin was mottled purple and black, crude stitches tearing through swollen flesh, and red streaks crawled up his neck like spiderwebs of poison. "Look at it, Elena," Lorenzo's voice cracked with agony. "This isn't just a wound, it's a graveyard." He took 1 step closer, swaying. "And you have 1 night to dig me out of it." Elena Rossi stared at the gruesome mess of flesh and wire on Lorenzo's chest, her stomach churning. The smell of necrosis was overpowering, a sickly sweet rot that clung to the back of her throat. She didn't need a medical license to know he was dying, she just needed eyes. "You need a hospital," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You need a sterile OR, general anesthesia, and a team of vascular surgeons, not a vet in a locked room." "I told you," Lorenzo rasped, stumbling backward until his legs hit the edge of the mattress. He collapsed heavily, the gun in his hand clattering onto the nightstand but remaining within arm's reach. "The hospitals are owned by the Rossi family, my enemies. If I check in, I don't check out." Elena spun around and ran to the heavy mahogany door. She grabbed the brass handle and pulled with all her weight. It didn't budge. She pounded on the wood, shouting, "Let me out! You can't keep me here." "Save your breath," Lorenzo groaned, his face slick with a cold sweat. "Reinforced steel core. Soundproof. The only way that door opens is if I punch in the code, or if my head of security comes in at sunrise to collect my body. And yours." Elena pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door, fighting back a rising panic attack. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to regulate her breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It was the same technique she used before a 12-hour trauma surgery. When she turned back around, the panic was shoved down, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "So that's the plan?" she asked, walking back toward the bed. "You kidnap me, threaten me, and expect me to perform a miracle with what? My bare hands." Lorenzo gestured weakly to a black leather bag sitting on the floor. "Open it." Elena crouched down and unzipped the bag. Her heart sank. It wasn't a proper surgical kit. It was a nightmare. Rusty hemostats, a bottle of high-proof whiskey, a few packs of non-absorbable sutures, and scalpels that looked like they had been bought at a hardware store. "This is garbage," she spat, standing up and kicking the bag. "This is a veterinary field kit. I can't operate on a human heart with tools meant for neutering cattle. You have sepsis, Lorenzo. The infection is in your blood. You need antibiotics, IV fluids, oxygen." "I have this," Lorenzo said, reaching for the whiskey bottle. He uncorked it with his teeth and took a long, burning swig, his eyes watering. "And I have you." "I'm not a doctor," Elena repeated, the shame of her past bubbling up. "I lost my license 3 years ago. I haven't touched a human patient since." "I know," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know about the malpractice suit. I know you were framed. And I know you're the best surgeon this city has ever seen, license or not." He leaned forward, the movement causing fresh blood to seep through the ragged stitches on his chest. He grabbed the gun from the nightstand. The motion wasn't fluid this time, it was desperate. He leveled the barrel at her forehead. "You have a choice, Dr. Rossi," he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You can let your past define you and die in this room with me tonight. Or you can pick up that scalpel, cut this butcher's work out of my chest, and prove them all wrong." Elena looked at the gun, then at the wound. The redness around the incision was spreading, tracking up his neck in angry streaks. "If I do this," she said softly, "it's going to hurt. I have no anesthesia. I have to cut you open while you're awake." Lorenzo's eyes burned with a feverish madness. "Then start cutting." Elena took the bottle of whiskey from Lorenzo's trembling hand. The glass was warm where he had been gripping it. "Drink," she commanded, her voice dropping an octave, shedding the tremble of the victim and adopting the cold authority of the surgeon. "Drink until you can't feel your fingers, because once I start, I'm not stopping." Lorenzo stared at her for a second, his gray eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. Finding none, he tipped the bottle back and drained a third of it in one go. He slammed the bottle down on the nightstand, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and lay back against the blood-soaked pillows. He didn't put the gun down. It rested on his chest, rising and falling with his labored breathing. "Do it," he growled. Elena snapped on a pair of latex gloves from the vet kit. They were a size too large, loose at the fingertips, but they would have to do. She poured the remaining whiskey over her hands and the scalpel, the sharp smell of alcohol briefly cutting through the stench of rot. She stepped up to the bed. "I need you to look away, Lorenzo. If you flinch, I might nick the pericardium. If I do that, you bleed out in seconds." "I don't look away," Lorenzo muttered, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles popped. Elena didn't argue. She placed her left hand on his chest, feeling the heat radiating from the skin. It was burning. She positioned the scalpel at the top of the angry, jagged incision. "On 3, she whispered. 1, 2. She didn't say 3. She sliced. Lorenzo let out a guttural sound, a strangled cry trapped behind clenched teeth, and his back arched off the mattress. His hand convulsed around the gun, knuckles turning white, but he didn't pull the trigger. "Breathe," Elena shouted, working fast. She used the tip of the blade to sever the tight, amateur stitches the previous doctor had placed. As the tension released, black blood and purulent fluid welled up, spilling over his ribs. Elena grabbed a handful of gauze and pressed it into the wound, soaking up the filth. "This isn't just infection," she muttered to herself, her eyes narrowing as she peered into the open cavity. "The tissue, look at the color." She used a retractor to pull back the skin. The muscle beneath wasn't just inflamed. It was gray and necrotic, but in a specific, web-like pattern that traced the nerve endings. She stopped. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran down her spine. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Who shot you?" "A ghost," he gritted out, sweat pouring down his face. "Why are you stopping?" "Because this isn't a bullet wound anymore," Elena said, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Bullets cause trauma. They don't cause this." She reached in with the forceps, bypassing the torn muscle and probing deeper, dangerously close to the lung. She felt something hard, not bone, not lead, plastic. "The doctor who stitched you up," Elena said, her realization turning into horror. He didn't botch the surgery, Lorenzo. He finished the job. What are you talking about? He didn't just stitch you up, Elena said, gripping the forceps. He planted something inside you. Planted? Lorenzo's voice was wet and jagged, like dragging a blade over gravel. The fever had glazed his eyes, but the words sharpened them for a second. What did you say? Hold still, Elena commanded. She abandoned the gauze and leaned in closer, her face inches from his open chest. The smell was overwhelming, but she ignored it. Her world had shrunk to the tip of the forceps and the tiny, unnatural object she could feel nestled against his rib. If you move now, she warned, this could rupture. If you don't tell me what's inside me, Lorenzo hissed, I'll shoot you in the leg. It's a capsule, Elena said, her hand steady despite the threat. It's lodged right next to the intercostal nerve. God, it's sophisticated. With a delicate twist of her wrist, she clamped the forceps around the foreign object. She pulled gently. There was a sickening squelch as the object came free from the necrotic tissue. Elena lifted it into the light of the bedside lamp. It was a small, polymer cylinder, no bigger than a grain of rice, perforated with microscopic holes. It was coated in a black, viscous sludge. A slow-release delivery system, Elena murmured, examining it. This wasn't meant to kill you instantly. It was meant to leak toxin into your bloodstream over days. It mimics sepsis. It makes your organs shut down one by one. She dropped the capsule into a metal tray. It clinked softly. The doctor you hired. Elena looked at Lorenzo, who was staring at the capsule with a look of pure, murderous betrayal. He didn't miss the infection. He caused it. He sewed this into you before he closed you up. He wanted you to die slowly, so everyone would think it was just a post-op complication. Lorenzo let out a low, terrifying laugh. He dropped the gun. He didn't need it anymore. His rage was keeping him alive now. A Trojan horse, he whispered, inside my own body. I took out the source, Elena said, but the poison is already in your blood. The tissue around it is dead. If I don't clean this out, really clean it, you'll still die of toxic shock before morning. She looked around the room, her eyes darting frantically. I need irrigation, saline, iodine, anything. The bag is empty, Lorenzo said, his breathing shallow. Then we improvise, Elena snapped. She scanned the luxurious bedroom. Her eyes landed on a silver kettle sitting on a serving tray near the window, and next to it, a first aid box mounted on the wall. I need boiling water, I need clean towels, and I need light, more light than this damn moody lamp. She grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and stripped the shade off, exposing the raw bulb. The harsh light flooded the wound, revealing the true extent of the damage. It was worse than she thought. The rot went deep. This is going to hurt more than the cutting, Elena warned, grabbing the bottle of whiskey again. I have to scrub the bone, Lorenzo. I have to scrape the dead tissue off your ribs. Lorenzo gripped the sheets, his knuckles white. He looked at the capsule in the tray, then up at her. For the first time, the predator looked at her not as prey, but as a lifeline. Burn it out, he said. Do whatever you have to do. Just keep me alive long enough to kill the man who put that there. Elena nodded. She poured the rest of the whiskey directly into the open cavity. Lorenzo screamed. It was a sound that would have shattered glass, a primal roar of agony that filled the penthouse. But beneath the scream, there was a click. Elena froze. Her eyes snapped to the wall of monitors mounted opposite the bed. The screens showing the hallway outside the penthouse door flickered, went static, and then turned black. Someone had just cut the feed. Lorenzo, Elena whispered, the blood draining from her face. We have company. Lorenzo stopped screaming. The agony was still there. Elena could see it in the way his entire body vibrated, muscles locked tight as bowstrings, but his survival instinct had overridden the pain. He forced his eyes open and looked at the wall of black monitors. They cut the hardline, he rasped, reaching blindly for the gun he had dropped on the sheets. His fingers curled around the grip. That means they're at the elevator. Who? Elena asked, her voice trembling. She was standing over him with bloody hands, caught between a dying man and an invisible army. The same people who paid the doctor to put that capsule in me, Lorenzo said. He tried to sit up, but the movement tore at the open wound and he groaned, falling back. They're here to finish the job. They know I'm not dead yet. He looked at Elena. The door, is it locked? Yes, she said. I checked it. Good, it'll buy us 5 minutes. Maybe 10 if they don't have explosives. He pointed the gun at the door, his hand shaking violently. You have to keep working. Are you insane? Elena hissed. There are hitmen outside, we need to hide. There is nowhere to hide, Lorenzo shouted, then winced, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. If I stop bleeding, I can fight. If I pass out from sepsis, they walk in here and put a bullet in my head, and then they put one in yours. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. Finish it, Elena. Scrape the bone, close me up. Give me a chance to stand. Elena looked at the door, then back at the horrific wound. The whiskey had washed away some of the necrosis, but the rib was still exposed, stained dark. If she didn't debride it, the infection would spread to his heart. She took a deep breath and grabbed a clean scalpel. If you scream, she said, her voice hard, they'll know exactly where we are. Lorenzo nodded. He reached for his leather belt, unbuckled it with trembling hands, and folded it in half. He shoved the thick leather between his teeth. Do it, he mumbled around the leather. Elena didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. She leaned in, the raw bulb casting harsh shadows into his chest cavity. She took the scalpel and began to scrape the rib bone. The sound was hideous, metal grating against bone, a dry, scratching noise that seemed to echo in the silent room. Lorenzo's head slammed back into the pillow. His jaw clamped down on the belt so hard Elena heard a sickening crack, a tooth giving way. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes, mixing with the sweat, but he didn't make a sound. Elena worked like a machine. Scrape, clean, irrigate. She removed the dead tissue, layer by layer, until she saw pink, healthy muscle and white, clean bone. She was just reaching for the needle to begin stitching, when a sound stopped her heart. Beep, beep, beep. It wasn't the heart monitor. It was the electronic lock on the penthouse door. Elena froze, the needle hovering over Lorenzo's chest. Lorenzo stopped breathing. They both turned to look at the keypad light on the door handle. It was flashing red. Someone was punching in codes, trying to brute force the entry. They have an override. Lorenzo spit the belt out, blood from his broken tooth staining his lips. He raised the gun, aiming it at the door. Get behind me. You can't shoot, Elena whispered, pushing him back down. Your chest is open. The recoil will tear your heart muscle. Then stitch me up, Lorenzo hissed. Fast. Elena's hands flew. She didn't use the delicate, cosmetic sutures she would have used in a plastic surgery clinic. She used a heavy, interrupted mattress stitch, the kind used in war zones to hold soldiers together. Needle in, pull, not cut. The beeping at the door sped up. Beep, 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 beep. They're getting close, Lorenzo warned, his thumb pulling back the hammer of the pistol. Almost done, Elena gasped, her hands slick with blood. 2 more. Beep, click. The light on the door handle turned green. The heavy bolts retracted with a loud, mechanical thud. The door handle began to turn. Elena tied the final knot and snipped the thread just as the heavy mahogany door swung open. She didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. She threw herself flat onto the floor on the far side of the bed, dragging the medical tray with her to minimize the noise. Lorenzo didn't hide. He couldn't. He was the bait. He lay perfectly still on the blood-soaked sheets, his chest a fresh battlefield of jagged stitches and inflamed skin. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and ragged. To anyone walking in, he looked dead or close enough that it wouldn't matter. But beneath the sheet, his right hand gripped the silver pistol, his finger resting on the trigger, waiting. A figure stepped into the room. It wasn't a team of tactical soldiers. It was one man. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a professional. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, silencer screwed onto the end of a pistol that looked far too large for indoors. Elena peeked through the gap between the bed frame and the floor. She saw expensive Italian loafers stepping onto the Persian rug. She held her breath, her hand clamped over her own mouth to stifle the sound of her pounding heart. The man walked to the foot of the bed. He stopped. "Mr. Valenti," the intruder said softly. His voice was calm, almost mocking. "I was told you were difficult to kill. It seems the rumors were exaggerated." Lorenzo didn't move. He didn't twitch. He played the corpse perfectly. The assassin raised his gun. He wasn't aiming for the chest. He aimed for the head. The double tap to ensure the job was done. Elena saw the angle. She saw the finger tightening on the trigger. She knew Lorenzo was waiting for him to get closer, but the assassin wasn't going to get closer. He was going to shoot from there. She had to do something. Elena grabbed the heavy glass whiskey bottle from the floor. She didn't stand up. She didn't scream. She rolled it. She shoved the bottle across the floor, under the bed, so it hit the assassin's shoe with a loud thud. The assassin flinched, his eyes darting down for a split second. That second was all Lorenzo needed. His eyes snapped open. He didn't sit up. He couldn't. Instead, he fired from his back, shooting through the silk sheet covering his legs. Fut, fut. 2 shots, muffled by the bedding but deadly accurate. The assassin jerked backward as the bullets tore through his stomach and chest. He fired a wild shot into the ceiling before collapsing onto the rug, gasping for air, blood pooling around his expensive shoes. Silence returned to the room, heavier than before. "Elena," Lorenzo rasped, "get his gun." Elena scrambled out from behind the bed. She didn't look at Lorenzo. She looked at the dying man on the floor. He was clawing at his holster for a backup weapon. She kicked his hand away, scooped up the suppressed pistol, and backed up until she hit the wall. She held it with 2 hands, trembling, pointing it at the intruder. "Is he alone?" Lorenzo asked, struggling to push himself up on one elbow. The movement tore at his fresh stitches, and a spot of red bloomed on the bandage, but he ignored it. The assassin laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. He looked at Elena, then at Lorenzo. "You think killing me stops it?" he choked out. "The contract is open. Every cleaner in Chicago is coming for you." Lorenzo dragged himself to the edge of the bed. He looked down at the man. "Who opened the door?" The assassin grinned, blood staining his teeth. "Ask your capo." His eyes rolled back. His breathing stopped. Lorenzo slumped back against the headboard, the adrenaline crashing. His face went gray. "Luca," he whispered. "Luca opened the door." "Who is Luca?" Elena asked, lowering the gun but not dropping it. "My right hand," Lorenzo said, closing his eyes. "My brother in everything but blood, the only other person who had the override code." He looked at Elena, and for the first time she saw true fear in the monster's eyes. Not fear of death, fear of heartbreak. "Check his pulse," Lorenzo commanded. "Make sure he's dead, and then lock that door again. We're not safe yet." Elena walked over to the body. She reached for the assassin's neck. No pulse. But as she pulled her hand away, she noticed something sticking out of his pocket. A phone, and it was buzzing. She pulled it out. The screen lit up with a text message. "Job done. The doctor is next." Elena stared at the screen. "Lorenzo," she said, her voice hollow. "They know I'm here." "They know I'm here," Elena repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The phone in her hand buzzed again, a second message flashing on the screen. "Send proof of KILLS." Lorenzo stared at the ceiling, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. The adrenaline that had sustained him during the firefight was gone, leaving him hollowed out by pain and shock. "They tracked the doctor," he murmured. "The man who put the capsule in me. They probably followed him here, or he sold us out before he died." "We have to leave," Elena said, shoving the assassin's phone into her pocket. She looked at the dead man on the floor, then at the blood-soaked bed. "This room is a kill box. If Luca betrayed you, he knows the layout. He knows the blind spots." "I can't walk," Lorenzo grunted. He tried to swing his legs off the bed, but the movement sent a spasm of agony through his torso that made him cry out. "The stitches, they'll tear." "Then I'll carry you," Elena said, her fear hardening into resolve. "Or I'll drag you, but we are not dying in this room." She rushed to the massive walk-in closet. It was filled with rows of pristine Italian suits, silk shirts, and handmade shoes, the armor of a king. Now it was just fabric. She grabbed a heavy wool coat and tossed it to him. Then she found a pair of tactical boots. "Put these on," she ordered, "and tell me where the panic room is. Every billionaire has a panic room." Lorenzo managed a weak, grim smile. "Behind the mirror in the bathroom, but it's sealed, biometric scanner, retinal." "Perfect," Elena said. She helped him sit up, gritting her teeth as she pulled his arm over her shoulder. He was heavy, pure muscle and dead weight. "Let's go." They were halfway to the bathroom when the lights in the penthouse died. Total darkness. "They cut the power," Lorenzo whispered. "That means they're breaching the main elevator." "Move," Elena hissed. They stumbled into the bathroom. It was a cavern of black marble and gold fixtures, cold and echoing. Elena fumbled for the flashlight she had seen in the first aid kit earlier. She clicked it on, the beam cutting through the dark. "Which mirror?" "The full-length one, left wall." Elena dragged him to it. "Scan it now." Lorenzo leaned forward. He grabbed the side of the frame to steady himself. A red laser beam shot out from a hidden sensor in the molding. It swept over his right eye. "Access denied." "What?" Elena stared at the small digital readout embedded in the glass. "My eye," Lorenzo gasped. "The fever, the pupils are dilated, it can't read the pattern." "Try again." He leaned in. The laser swept again. "Access denied." "Damn it!" Lorenzo slammed his fist against the glass. "It won't open." From the main room, they heard a sound. A soft ding, the elevator doors opening. Then the distinct sound of heavy boots on hardwood floors, lots of them. "We're trapped," Lorenzo said, sliding down the wall to the floor. "Leave me, Elena. Hide in the shower. Maybe they won't look." "Shut up," Elena snapped. She wasn't looking at the door. She was looking at the digital keypad next to the retinal scanner. "There has to be a manual override, a code." "Only Luca has it," Lorenzo said, defeat in his voice. "And Luca is the one leading them." Elena looked at the keypad. 4 digits, 10,000 combinations. Then she remembered the assassin's phone in her pocket. The message, "Send proof of KILLS." "The assassin," she said, her mind racing. "He got in. Luca gave him a code." She pulled out the phone. She scrolled up to the previous messages. There, sent 2 hours ago. Entry code, 8801. Elena punched the numbers into the keypad. Click, hiss. The mirror popped open, revealing a steel door behind it. "Get in." Elena shoved Lorenzo into the small, reinforced room, just as a flashlight beam swept across the bathroom doorway. "In here," a voice shouted from the bedroom. "Clear the bathroom." Elena slammed the steel door shut and threw the deadbolt. A split second later, bullets hammered against the metal from the outside, ringing like church bells. They were safe, for now. Elena collapsed onto the floor of the panic room, panting. The space was small, lined with shelves of water, canned food, and weapons. Lorenzo lay against the wall, his coat open, checking his stitches. They held. He looked up at Elena, his face illuminated by the emergency red lighting of the panic room. "You saved me," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Again." "Don't thank me yet," Elena said, looking at the wall of weapons. She picked up an assault rifle, checking the magazine with a practiced ease that made Lorenzo's eyebrows shoot up. "My father," she explained briefly. "He was in the mob, too, Russian. He taught me how to shoot before he taught me how to read." She handed the rifle to Lorenzo. "So, who is Luca, and why does he want you dead?" Lorenzo's expression hardened. The pain was still there, but the weakness was gone. In the red light, he looked like the devil reclaiming his throne. "Luca," he said, racking the charging handle of the rifle, "is my cousin. And tonight, he just made the last mistake of his life." "Luca," Lorenzo repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "My cousin," My blood. The man I trusted to watch my back while I slept. He checked the safety on the rifle, his movements stiff but steady. He was the one who insisted on the cleaner doctor. He said it was safer than the hospital. He set the whole thing up. Elena sat on a crate of ammunition, hugging her knees. The adrenaline was fatting, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. If he's leading the team outside, he knows about this room. He knows it's impenetrable. He also knows it has a separate ventilation system, Lorenzo said, looking up at the small vent in the ceiling. And if he can't get in, he'll smoke us out. As if on cue, a faint hissing sound started. A white plume of gas began to seep through the vent. Tear gas, Elena coughed, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Or something worse. Masks, Lorenzo ordered, pointing to a shelf. Put them on, now. They grabbed the gas masks. Elena fumbled with the straps, her fingers shaking, but she managed to seal it over her face. Lorenzo did the same. The sound of their breathing became loud and raspy, amplified by the rubber. We can't stay here, Lorenzo's voice was muffled. We have to move. Move where? Elena shouted through the mask. There's an army outside that door. There's a service tunnel, Lorenzo said. Behind that rack. He pointed to a heavy steel shelf loaded with water jugs. It leads to the elevator shaft, maintenance access. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Elena rushed to him, hooking her arm under his. Together, they shoved the heavy shelf aside, scraping metal against concrete. Behind it was a small, circular hatch. Go, Lorenzo said. You first. Elena hesitated. Lorenzo, your chest. I'll be right behind you. Go. Elena spun the wheel on the hatch and pushed it open. A rush of cold, damp air hit her face. It smelled of grease and old dust. She crawled through. Lorenzo followed, dragging the rifle. He pulled the hatch shut behind them and spun the lock just as the panic room began to fill with thick white smoke. They were in a narrow concrete crawlspace. It was dark, lit only by the faint glow of indicator lights on pipes running along the walls. This way, Lorenzo said, taking the lead despite his injury. He seemed to be running on pure hate now. They crawled for what felt like miles, their knees scraping against the rough floor. Finally, they reached a grate that looked down into the main elevator shaft. The cables hummed in the darkness. We have to climb down, Lorenzo said, peering through the grate. 3 floors to the garage level. You can't climb, Elena said, looking at his chest. You'll rip the stitches open. You'll bleed out before we get there. Then I bleed, Lorenzo said. Better than suffocating in a box. He kicked the grate open. It clattered down the shaft, the sound echoing for a terrifyingly long time. He swung his legs over the edge and grabbed the maintenance ladder. He groaned, a sound of pure agony, as his weight pulled on his chest muscles. Lorenzo, Elena grabbed his arm. He looked up at her, his mask obscuring his face, but his eyes were clear. If I fall, he said, don't stop. Take the car in the private bay. The keys are in the wheel well. Drive until you hit the state line. I'm not leaving you, Elena said, climbing out onto the ladder beside him. They began the descent, step by painful step. Above them, they heard the muffled sound of an explosion, the panic room door being blown off its hinges. Luca had breached the room. Faster, Lorenzo hissed. They reached the garage level. Lorenzo dropped the last few feet, landing hard. He stumbled, falling to one knee, clutching his chest. When he pulled his hand away, his glove was slick with fresh blood. The car, he gasped, pointing to a sleek black sedan parked in a designated spot, isolated from the rest. Get us out of here. Elena sprinted to the car. She found the key fob hidden in the wheel well, just as he said. She unlocked the doors and helped Lorenzo into the passenger seat. She jumped into the driver's seat and hit the ignition. The engine roared to life, a V12 beast that shook the concrete floor. Wait, Lorenzo said, grabbing her arm. Look. He pointed to the garage exit ramp. The heavy steel security gate was coming down. Fast. Floor it, Lorenzo shouted. Elena slammed her foot on the gas. The car surged forward, tires screeching. She aimed for the gap beneath the closing gate. It was going to be close, too close. "Hold on," Elena screamed. The car shot under the gate just as the metal teeth slammed into the trunk, shearing off the rear spoiler with a deafening screech of tearing metal. But they were through. They burst out onto the rainy Chicago streets, the city lights blurring past them. Elena checked the rearview mirror. No one was following yet. She looked over at Lorenzo. He had slumped against the window. His eyes were closed. The front of his coat was soaked dark with blood. "Lorenzo." No answer. "Lorenzo." She reached over and shook him. His head lolled to the side. He was unconscious, and he was bleeding out. "Damn it!" Elena hit the steering wheel. She was driving a $300,000 car with a dying mafia boss in the passenger seat, and she had nowhere to go. Except one place. She spun the wheel, drifting around a corner and heading toward the one place she swore she would never return to. The slums, the vet clinic. Elena drove like a woman possessed, the high-performance sedan hydroplaning on the wet asphalt as she tore through the red lights of South Chicago. Beside her, Lorenzo was silent. Too silent. She pulled into the alley behind the veterinary clinic. The gaping hole from her abduction yesterday was boarded up with plywood, a crude bandage on a shattered building. She killed the engine and ran around to the passenger side. She hauled Lorenzo out. He was dead weight now, barely groaning as his feet dragged on the concrete. She kicked the back door open and dragged him inside, into the familiar smell of bleach and animal fear. She hoisted him onto the metal exam table, the same one she had used for the Doberman. "Come on, Lorenzo," she panted, cutting away his blood-soaked coat and shirt. "Don't you dare die on me now, not after I dragged you through a ventilation shaft." The wound had reopened. The strenuous climb and the impact of the landing had popped 3 of her mattress stitches. He was losing blood fast, but more importantly, he was going into shock. She grabbed an IV bag of saline from the vet's supply cabinet, hung it on the hook, and found a vein in his arm with practiced ease. She started the drip wide open. Then she grabbed the stapler. Skin staples. It was brutal, scarring, and crude, but it was fast. Click, click, click. She sealed the wound shut again. Lorenzo gasped, his eyes flying open as the pain pierced through the unconsciousness. He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Where are we?" "My clinic," Elena said, not pulling away. She put her other hand on his forehead. He was burning up, but his pulse was stronger. "You tore the stitches. I had to staple you. It's going to leave a nasty scar." "I have enough scars," Lorenzo muttered, releasing her wrist and looking around the dingy room. "Why here? Why not a safe house?" "Because Luca knows your safe houses," Elena said, checking his IV. "He doesn't know this place. He thinks he grabbed me from here and that was the end of it." Lorenzo tried to sit up, but Elena pushed him back down. "Don't," she ordered. "You've lost a liter of blood. If you move, you pass out again." He lay back, watching her. His gaze was different now. The predator was still there, but the aggression was gone, replaced by a dark, intense curiosity. "You drive like a getaway driver," he noted. "I told you," Elena said, turning to wash her hands in the sink. "My father." "The Russian gambling debt," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. Elena froze. She turned off the tap slowly. "How do you know about that?" "I told you I hunted for you," Lorenzo said. "I know everything. Your father borrowed $50,000 from the Volkov Bratva. He died before he could pay it back. Now they own you, and your sister." Elena's face hardened. "I handle my own problems." "You don't handle the Volkovs," Lorenzo said. "They are animals. They don't want the money anymore, Elena. They want you." He reached into his pocket, the one part of his ruined suit that wasn't soaked in blood, and pulled out a small burner phone. He dialed a number from memory. "Who are you calling?" "Put it on speaker," Lorenzo said, handing it to her. She pressed the button. "Valenti," a voice answered, rough, Italian. "It's done," Lorenzo said, his voice cold as ice. "Luca is a traitor. Burn it all down." Understood, boss. And the girl? Lorenzo looked at Elena. He reached out and with a trembling hand, touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of grease. The girl is with me, Lorenzo said, his eyes locking onto hers. Clear her debt with the Russians, pay them double, and tell them if they ever look in her direction again, I will erase their entire lineage. Yes, boss. Lorenzo hung up. Elena stared at him, stunned. You just paid it, just like that. I didn't pay it, Lorenzo said softly. I ended it. He took a deep breath, wincing as his chest expanded. You saved my life twice tonight, Elena. The debt is settled. You're free. Free, Elena repeated, the word feeling foreign. The sun is coming up, Lorenzo said, nodding toward the boarded-up window where slivers of gray light were piercing through. The deal was one night. You kept your end. He closed his eyes. Take the car, go get your sister, leave Chicago. Elena looked at the door. Then she looked at the man lying on the metal table. He was the most powerful man in the city, and he was completely alone. If she left him here, infection or his enemies would get him within hours. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob. Then she turned the lock. Click. She walked back to the table, grabbed a stool, and sat down beside him. Lorenzo opened his eyes. What are you doing? I'm a doctor, Elena said, crossing her arms, and my patient isn't stable yet. Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then I guess you're stuck with me, he whispered. Doctor. Elena stayed. She told herself it was medical necessity, that leaving a post-op patient with a stapled chest wound in a dirty clinic was malpractice, even if she had no license to lose. But as the hours stretched into the afternoon and Lorenzo slept the fitful sleep of the healing, she knew it was more than that. She cleaned the clinic while he slept. She checked the locks on the doors. She loaded the assassin's gun and placed it on the counter. Around sunset, Lorenzo woke up. His fever had broken. He sat up on the table, grimacing as the staples pulled tight. You're still here, he said, his voice raspy from dehydration. I told you, Elena said, handing him a bottle of water. I don't leave things unfinished. Lorenzo drank the water in one go. He swung his legs off the table and stood up. He swayed slightly but caught himself. We can't stay here tonight. My men will have secured the penthouse by now, but Luca, if he escaped the explosion, he'll be desperate. He'll hit every property I own. So where do we go? Elena asked. Nowhere, Lorenzo said, walking to the boarded-up window and peering through a crack. We wait. Wait for what? For them to come to us. Elena stared at him. You want to use this place as a trap. It's the last place they'll look for a king, Lorenzo said, turning to face her. But it's the first place they'll look for you if they realize you're the one who saved me. He walked over to the counter and picked up the gun. He checked the magazine. Turn off the lights, Elena. Elena hit the switch. The clinic plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the cracks in the plywood. Get behind the counter, Lorenzo ordered. Stay low. 10 minutes later, a car pulled into the alley. Headlights swept across the boarded window. Elena huddled behind the reception desk, her heart pounding. She heard car doors open, footsteps crunching on glass. 2 men, Lorenzo whispered from the shadows near the exam table. Heavy steps, boots. The back door handle jiggled. Then, a loud crack as a crowbar forced the lock. The door swung open. 2 silhouettes stepped into the clinic, silhouetted against the alley lights. They had assault rifles. Check the back, one voice growled. Find the girl. The boss wants to know where Valenti is. They moved into the room. Lorenzo didn't shoot. Not yet. He waited until they were fully inside, away from the door. He moved. In the dark, Lorenzo Valenti wasn't an injured man. He was a shadow. He stepped out from behind the exam table. Bang, bang. 2 shots, deafening in the small space. The first man dropped instantly. The second spun around, firing blindly into the dark. Bullets shattered the medicine cabinets, glass raining down on Elena. She covered her head, screaming. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He walked forward, firing again. The second man collapsed. Silence. Clear, Lorenzo called out. Elena stood up, trembling. Are there more? Always, Lorenzo said. He walked to the bodies. He rolled one over with his boot. These aren't Luca's men. These are mercenaries, cheap ones. He looked at Elena. Luca is desperate. He's throwing everything he has at us. Suddenly, a bright light flooded the room from the front window. Not a car headlight, a spotlight. Valenti, a voice boomed from a loudspeaker outside. We know you're in there. Come out and the girl lives. Stay inside and we burn it down. Lorenzo looked at Elena. His face was calm, terrifyingly so. Do you trust me? He asked. I stitched your heart back together, Elena said, her voice shaking but defiant. I trust you not to waste my work. Good, Lorenzo said. He grabbed a canister of oxygen from the corner and a lighter from the dead mercenary's pocket. Because we're going to make an exit. An exit? Elena stared at the oxygen tank in Lorenzo's hand. That's a bomb. It's a distraction, Lorenzo corrected. Get to the back door. When I say run, you run, don't look back. He rigged the tank, loosening the valve until it hissed loudly, filling the small reception area with pure oxygen. He lit the lighter, holding the flame just inches from a pile of gauze he'd thrown on the floor. Go, Lorenzo shouted. Elena sprinted for the back alley door. Lorenzo tossed the lighter and followed her, his injured chest heaving. They burst into the alley just as the clinic exploded. The blast blew the front windows out, sending a fireball rolling into the street where the mercenaries were waiting. The shockwave knocked the attackers flat. Chaos erupted. Car alarms blared. Sirens wailed in the distance. In the confusion, Lorenzo grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her into the shadows of the neighboring building. They moved through the labyrinth of alleyways, away from the fire, away from the death squads. They didn't stop until they reached a nondescript sedan parked 3 blocks away, one of Lorenzo's stash cars he'd memorized years ago. He broke the window with his elbow, hot-wired it in seconds, and they were gone. Visual time jump, 2 weeks later. A sleek modern mansion overlooking Lake Michigan. It is serene, light, and open, the opposite of the dark penthouse. Lorenzo stood on the balcony, the wind whipping his dark hair. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the top, revealing the top of a long, angry scar that ran down his chest. He looked healthier, stronger. The gray pallor of death was gone, replaced by the golden tan of a man who had survived hell. Elena walked out to join him. She wore a silk dress, not scrubs. She looked like she belonged there. Luca, she asked softly. Handled, Lorenzo said, not turning around. The organization has been purged. The traitors are gone. The city is quiet. He turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. He held it out to her. It was a check, $10 million. This is enough to buy any hospital in the country, Lorenzo said. Or to disappear to an island where no one knows your name. You can have your life back, Elena. A better life. Elena looked at the check. Then she looked at the scar on his chest. You're firing me, she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm setting you free, Lorenzo said seriously. I'm a dangerous man, Elena. My world is blood and bullets. You're a healer. You don't belong in the dark. Elena took the check. She looked at the zeros. It was freedom. It was safety. It was everything she had dreamed of when she was stitching up dogs in the slums. Slowly, deliberately, she tore the check in half, then in half again. She let the pieces flutter away in the wind, drifting down toward the lake like confetti. I don't want the money, Elena said, stepping closer to him until she could feel the heat radiating off his chest, the heart she had restarted with her own hands. And I don't want to leave. Lorenzo stared at her, his composure cracking. Elena. You said you were dangerous, she whispered, reaching up to touch the scar she had given him. But you're also the only person who came for me when I was invisible. You saved me just as much as I saved you. She looked up into his eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Lorenzo. unless you make me." For the first time since she met him, the king of Chicago smiled. It wasn't a smirk or a grimace. It was genuine. He reached out, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, right over the scars she had from her years of surgery. "Then stay," he whispered against her skin. "Stay and rule it with me." They said Lorenzo Valenti was a monster, a cold-blooded killer who cared for nothing but power. But in the end, the only thing that could kill the beast was the beauty who refused to let him die. And God help anyone who tries to hurt the surgeon who saved the king. If you believe that love can save even the darkest souls, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Because in the underworld, the story never truly ends.